Yeah, I think this is like episode 56 or something along those lines. Um, didn't think it would get that as far as a podcast goes. Usually, my train of thought just, I can't stay focused on one topic or one project, and then it all just kind of deteriorates from there as I go from a podcast to wanting to write a book or something like that, which I am thinking about writing a book here real soon. Not fiction. I wrote a fiction book not too long ago. I'm not even going to tell you the name because it's not worth reading. I'll just be honest with you up front. I published it on Amazon. It is on there. So if you're really curious, you can look it up. And it was an experiment just to see more or less what it would take to get published on Amazon. Basically, the self-publishing avenue, um, which, by the way, if you're interested, you can check it out. But I didn't edit it substantially or anything, and it's in its still first draft, which just is a testimony to my impatience and lack of dedication. But I've been dedicated to this podcast. I push it out every week, once a week, and yeah. So, but I think this is we're getting up close to episode 60. When I get to 100, I think I'll pop a bottle of champagne in here and ruin the walls of this house that we're renting, and douse our bed in alcohol. Which I won't drink because I don't drink, but at least it'll smell like that in here. So at least the appearance of a party will suffice, even though there will be no real celebrations, at least in that manner. Anyway, I wasn't sure what to do this episode on today, to be honest. I've whined about it constantly in other podcasts. How tiring it can be to turn on the news and try to hunt for something new to complain about or argue about or voice an opinion on. I feel like there's so many different podcasts and shows that do that. It's like, to get your voice heard in the midst of all that can be kind of frustrating because there's a lot of people I feel like that do it. I don't want to say better because I want to, be confident in what I can do, but there's so many Ben Shapiro's and other people like that are putting out videos, and they all talk about the news and they know more about politics than I do, and that kind of thing. So it can be kind of frustrating at times. What do you talk about? And do people get tired of hearing just about politics? I know I do eventually, given enough time. It's just an endless mad circus that never really seems to go anywhere. And I've become convinced over time that really it never will go anywhere because the people in office don't want it to go anywhere. I mean, on certain core important issues like abortion or gay rights or something like that, conservatives really, when they're in power, don't do what they could do to actually hit the red button and solve some of these problems. Like the border crisis is a perfect example. For 2 years after President Trump was elected, we had Republicans in power, and did they do anything about the border? No. They had control of the Senate, the House, and they had President Trump in office, and there was not a dang bit of wall built, number one, and he didn't reverse any of um, the previous administration's border or immigration policies. The asylum process remained the same. The flow across the border remained the same. Catch and release remained in place. DACA was still there. I don't know if it still is now, but it's irrelevant. They're not really trying to fix the problem. I think there's a few good people that are. But, think about it like this, and I admit this is incredibly cynical, but think about it like this. On an issue like abortion, we'll say, that's an issue that can get a Republican who is running a guaranteed vote. Think of all the millions of evangelical Christians across this country that are single issue voters, as far as abortion is concerned. If you're pro life, they will vote for you. And I include myself in this. I've voted for people just purely because they are pro life. So it's a guarantee for votes. And I think they know that. And, every time they're in a position to actually do something about abortion, they never do. And I think ultimately what it can come down to is they don't want to really do something about abortion, um, or any of these other issues. They don't want to fix the border ultimately, Mitch McConnell or any of these other people. They just want your vote. They know that when they run, they can point. They know what conservatives and what evangelical Christians, what their core issues are: abortion, the border, religious freedom. That's it. After that, they're willing to go home and let the rest of the culture go to hell. And it is. Um, and so they just get up there and they say, well, um, I will fight. I've always voted pro-life, and we'll look at their track record. Oh yeah, they voted pro-life, but they never actually. None of the bills or any of the things that they voted for actually did anything for the pro-life cause, really, in the broad scheme of things. But still, they voted for such and such a bill. They gave that speech over there during the March for Life, and yeah, so we'll vote for you. So it's in their best interest, really, to keep abortion alive and thriving. Just for the votes, if anything, and it's the same goes for the border. Now that's the border is a little bit different in the sense that, I mean, you can always, as long as people are having children, you can keep the abortion industry going. It's sustainable that way. Very sick, but it is. But the border is a little bit different in the sense that eventually the cumulative effect of people crossing it and destabilizing the economy eventually will bring the country to its knees. So it's also in their best interest to do just enough about it to prevent that from happening, but not fix the problem ultimately. I know, again, I said that's kind of a cynical way to look at it, but that's why I get tired of politics sometimes. It's like, I feel like that guy in Network, if anyone's seen that movie where he just, he turns into like a kind of mad prophet, and they put this madman in front of the camera. It's a movie. And, he has that famous speech where he says, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And he's yelling that into the news camera. You get that way. You get that feeling sometimes of just absolute frustration. And then the church is no better. It really isn't. I mean, it's been infiltrated on every single level by every aspect of our culture. So, it's kind of like you just sigh but what I did want to talk about here, rather than just complain and whine and about how terrible things are, but I think that ultimately, it's not up to us, to really worry about the broad picture. No, I mean, yes, we should have concern for what the direction the country's taking, or the church, as it deteriorates into heresy and whatever else. Um, of course, we should worry about those things, but ultimately, God is in control of all those things. Very clearly from the Bible, God raises nations up and he brings them down. And history always has a way of repeating itself over and over and over again. You can see from Rome to Greece, to Great Britain in the more modern times. Empires rise up, they have their apex, they reach their peak, then they succumb to corruption and they deteriorate slowly and collapse inwardly on themselves, in a form of kind of suicide. Rome wasn't defeated by the barbarians. Rome collapsed morally, and then the barbarians came in and took advantage of the financial and moral collapse of Rome. The same thing happened with the Greeks. It was the family that capitulated in both cases. And the family is obviously the bedrock of society. So that's it's a warning kind of to where we're at here in the country, in the sense that the family has totally vanished in American society. People are procreating at all. um, the fatherlessness rate in the country, especially in minority communities, is astronomical. It's a totally separate debate as to actually why that is happening. And I would argue it's more of a moral thing rather than a political or legal, as I know some people have debated me on that I know, pointing more to discrimination as the reason that so many African American fathers, for example, are not a part of their families, are vacant. They would point, some people I know point to the legal reasons, saying there's discrimination. I don't deny that might be the case in some situations, but I think overall, broadly speaking, it's a moral issue. We're not teaching children, especially young men, the importance of family, unity, commitment, monogamy, sexual purity, and all these things. Being a good role model for your children, a godly example, training the child up in the way that he should go, so that when he is older, he will not depart from it. Um, all these kinds of things, are just not being taught anymore. Um, but to get to the heart of kind of what I wanted to say here, and this is not going to be a long episode, but it's something that's been kind of weighing on my mind, is this issue of compromise. I think that um, if we can get anything out of the way we look at the world this week, we should all really ask ourselves, really get down to the nitty gritty, and be honest with yourself. What is something that you just will not compromise? Um, and I think the answer might surprise you, and it might surprise myself too, if we really ask yourself, what is a value or a moral or a truth that you cannot, not only will not, but cannot compromise? And do you have such a thing? You know? Not too long ago in this country's history, I think most people would have readily listed any number of things, core values that at least in their own mind, no matter what happened in life around them, they would never compromise those things, regardless, of personal ruin or torture or whatever. They, at least in their mind, they're assured of the fact that regardless of negative situations or consequences, they would not compromise said belief or value. I don't think that most people can really say that anymore. Whoever's listening to this podcast, ask yourself that, really be honest, is there something that you would hold to no matter what? And I'm not talking about whether it was proved wrong. Let's say it's a belief, and there was evidence brought out against it that just refuted it completely. I'm not talking about that you should hold blindly to something that's been proven wrong, but more a value, especially in this valueless society that we're increasingly living in, that you would hold to regardless of the ramifications, loss of job, loss of friends, family turning their backs on you, whatever, what have you. Maybe your child being taken away because the views you hold are not socially acceptable anymore and are viewed by the government or sociological agencies. Is that the right word? I don't know. As abusive, perhaps. And I'm not talking about any kind of physical abuse or anything like that. But just as an example, you can't discipline children today like you used to. It's considered abusive. I've heard some people on the internet actually say that teaching creationism, the idea that God created the world in the book of Genesis in the Bible, is child abuse. To not teach evolution is child abuse. People say that now. So yeah, I mean, really think about that, and I don't think that's I don't think that's a question that you should just brush off, and not really consider, because the answer, I think, may surprise you if you really thought about it. What is something that you really truly believe that you will not compromise? I'm not talking about like uh, supporting beliefs that are important, but you would agree to disagree with somebody so that you wouldn't die on that hill. I'm talking about something that no matter what, you would be willing to go to your death for. You would give up everything for. You would not surrender. You would not compromise. It didn't matter what the consequences were. It's a very rare thing today, I think, to find somebody that has those kind of core values that they are willing to give everything for. Now, our founding fathers, as an example, believed thusly. Is that a word? I'm not sure. Thusly. But they did clearly, freedom, religious freedom, freedom of speech. The whole Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights were all things that they gladly, willingly, and with no reservation would have given their lives for, and many did in the American Revolution. The Civil War, these were people that were more than willing to give their lives for what they believed in. You can look at the early church history, the disciples, the St. Paul, the Apostle Peter, James, who was an unbeliever, the brother of Jesus, and who Jesus later showed himself to in a resurrected form. And this, of course, convinced James that his brother was the risen Lord, and he went on to die for Christ. These were people that really dedicated their lives to a belief, a core belief, something that they would not surrender or compromise. The Apostle Paul, he went from being somebody who was a persecutor of Christians, killing them, holding the robes of those who were stoning Christians, like Stephen. And he went on the road to Damascus. He was riding his horse, and God knocked him off the horse and blinded him, and said to him, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul's first response to this is incredible, because right away, this was such a magnificent happening that he knew right away that this was God, and he said, who are you, Lord? And then he went on from there to, without reservation, without fear, with no holding back, no compromise, to proclaim the gospel of Christ, and without fear, and without reservation, and he was more than willing to die for the gospel. He was stoned on multiple occasions, beaten, left for dead, jailed. It didn't matter. Nothing stopped him. Nothing slowed him down. I don't see a whole lot of that today among patriots. If you talk about the founding fathers, how many people today know anything about the civics? Have taken even the briefest civics lesson, or know what the core values that are in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, or upon which this country was founded. How many people know anything about that? Not too many, I don't think. You could lay most of the blame at the feet of the public school system, which is not teaching kids anything about our country's history. It's if only to say that we were genocidal maniacs that killed off the Indians, enslaved the black people, and just basically set up a white patriarchal society for our own benefits and the detriment of everybody else. If you're talking about that kind of history, then yeah, sure, they're learning history. But anybody who knows anything about the American Revolution, or Thomas Jefferson, or Ben Franklin, or George Washington knows that is not a true, accurate portrayal of history. The same can be said for the church. How many people in the pews actually know anything about the Apostle Paul, or truly what Christ taught, or the doctrines of justification, sanctification, or any of the rest? How many people call themselves Calvinists and don't know the 5 points of Calvinism? They don't know what tulip is. They don't know the 5 solas. This isn't just something to brush aside, because you have your latest iTunes, or iPhone, I should say, or you have an Alexa who can answer all your questions for you. Would you die for Alexa? I think not. These are temporary things that we're allowing to blot out the core issues of our day. Things like Alexa and all these stupid gadgets that we that we allow to just suck up our time and blot out reality for us. It's a drug. All this technology is just a drug. I mean, they're doing studies on it now, on the effects that computers and social media and iPhones and all that have on individuals, especially young developing minds. And the release of dopamine that it produces is along the same lines as a drug hit. And it's numbing people to reality and blotting out the important core issues, so that people really don't have values that they would give their life for, give their all for. They're numbed. They give their time, which is one of those valuable commodities we have, to useless, stupid pleasures that avail you nothing. Either in this life or the life to come, your iPhone is not going to help you at all. When the hammer comes down here in this country, which inevitably it will, we're at $22 trillion and climbing. Your iPhone will not mean diddly squat, and you can't take it with you after you die. These are meaningless pleasures. All right. Um, so I think if you do anything this week, just dwell on that one thing. Do you have a core value, a core belief, something that you would give your all for and hold nothing back in reserve? Um, again, I don't think that most people can answer in the affirmative. I can. I would say it's the gospel. What else is there, really, at the end of the day? Um, but yeah, I'd be interested to hear anyone else's opinions on this. It's a short episode. I'll be back next week. In the meantime, good night and God be with you.